The synthetic element, Oganesson, is more than just a periodic table capstone. In the framework of the oak matrix, it represents the very womb of creation where our daily and cosmic rhythms finally manifest into physical reality. Today we're dissecting Joe Bandel's Anchor 12, exploring how the lunar, solar, and daily cycles serve as a rhythmic heartbeat pulsing through 118 elemental layers of existence. It's a system where high-level physics meets esoteric mysticism, and it fundamentally changes how we view the passage of time.
It really does reframe time from a linear progression into a biological and spiritual pulse. Bandel's core premise in Anchor 12 is that everything in our reality operates through these 118 elemental layers. These layers aren't just abstract numbers. They correspond to the periodic table, with Oganesson, element 118, acting as the astral equator. The cycles we experience, the 24-hour day, the lunar month, the solar year, are essentially waves of energy moving through these layers in a process of pressurization and release.
Let's unpack those layers first. He divides them into two hemispheres, right? The north and the south, but they aren't geographic. They're planes of potential versus planes of structure.
Exactly. The northern hemisphere consists of the spiritual planes. Bandel describes these as chaos-like, but not in the sense of a mess. It's chaos as expansive potential, pure light and possibility. The southern hemisphere houses the magical planes, which he characterizes as amber-like. These are about containment and giving form. They're structure-oriented. The magic happens at the astral equator, which is that 118th layer, Oganesson. This is where the expansive spirit meets the structured form to birth an event into space and time.
It sounds almost like a mechanical pump. You've got this swelling phase and then a rupture phase. If we look at the mechanics, how does that energy actually move through the layers?
The swelling phase is a top-down process. Photon energy, which Bandel identifies as the expansive male principle from Anchor 1, fills the layers from the top spiritual planes down. During this phase, you're building a charge. On a personal level, this is when your awareness feels expansive. It's an invitation to lean into life with intensity. Then comes the rupture phase. That held tension eventually bursts. It's a generative leap where the pressure is resolved into a vertical flow, leading to manifestation. It's not a violent burst, it's described as a loving resolution of pressure. Finally, there's a reversal, a bottom-up decompression that eases the planes so the whole cycle can start over.
The idea of a loving resolution is interesting because it suggests the universe isn't forcing things to happen, but rather inviting them. But let's look at the daily cycle. Most of us just see a 24-hour clock, but Bandel maps this swell and rupture onto the sun's path. Noon is the peak of the swell, right?
Yes, noon is the maximum swell. It's the daily inhale of the solar surge. The layers are packed with fresh charge, making it the ideal time for what he calls conscious buildup. This is when you want to put in your most intense effort, deep creative work, hard physical exercise, or serious meditation. You're essentially filling your biological battery while the cosmic environment is at its peak pressure.
And then we move towards sunset. If noon is the inhale, is sunset the beginning of the exhale?
Sunset is the transition to compression. This is where the release starts. The energy begins its downward flow. In practical terms, this is when the day's insights or efforts start to take shape. But the real action happens at midnight. That's the peak rupture, the deepest low of the cycle. Bandel explains that at midnight, there's a discharge into the astral flow. This is when your astral cords activate and vertical dream travel is strongest. The things you charged at noon are gestating or being released into the vertical flow of the matrix.
So if midnight is the rupture, then sunrise must be the integration period. It's not just waking up, it's seeing how the night cycle actually completed itself.
That's why morning vitality is such a big indicator in this system. If you wake up feeling integrated and vital, it means your nightly discharge was successful. The fresh potential floods in at sunrise, carrying the momentum from whatever resolutions happened while you were dreaming. It's a microcosm of the larger lunar and solar cycles.
I want to push back a bit on the lunar cycle. He breaks it down into very specific 3.5-day windows. The new moon starts the swelling, but by the first quarter, we're already into a rupture phase. That seems faster than typical lunar associations where the full moon is the only big moment.
It's about the internal mechanics of the 118 layers. From the new moon to the first 3.5 days, you're filling those top layers with photon energy. But the period from the waxing crescent to the first quarter is a rupture, a controlled release that facilitates dream movement. The phase from the first quarter to the full moon is actually a magical compression. The south plane layers are squeezing that potential into physical events. The full moon is the peak because the lowest layers, those closest to our physical reality, finally rupture. That's why we see a birth into reality or a culmination at the full moon. It's the highest pressure finally hitting the bottom layer.
And Oganesson, element 1118, is the anchor for all this. In science, Oganesson is incredibly unstable, with a half-life of less than a millisecond. It only exists for a tiny fraction of a second before decaying. Does Bandel address that instability as part of the womb concept?
He actually uses that physical elusiveness as a metaphor for the nature of manifestation. The astral equator is where the non-physical becomes physical. Just as Oganesson is the capstone that scientists can barely hold on to, the moment of manifestation is that fleeting high-energy point where spirit and matter touch. In the oak matrix, the instability of the element reflects the dynamic, ever-changing nature of the womb of creation. It's not a static place, it's a constant state of becoming.
Let's scale this up to the solar year. He aligns the equinoxes and solstices with this same heartbeat. The autumn equinox is the start of the swell, which feels counterintuitive. Usually autumn is seen as things dying down.
In this model, the autumn equinox is the post-harvest potential. Think of an oak tree absorbing the last of the summer sun to fuel root growth in the winter. You're drawing in potential. Then, the winter solstice is the rebirth peak. It's an influx of light and love into the system. By the spring equinox, you have a balance where future visions start to take shape, leading to the summer solstice, which is the full expansion and harvest. The longest day of the year is the peak of the expansive male photon energy filling the layers.
He also mentions the cross quarters, Beltane, Lughnasadh, Samhain, and Imbolc. These aren't just pagan holidays here, they're merging thresholds. How do they function within the 118-layer mechanism?
They act as midpoints where the pressure states are shifting. If you think of the equinoxes and solstices as the peaks and troughs of a wave, the cross quarters are the points where the wave is moving most rapidly between those states. They are thresholds where the spiritual and magical planes are most actively merging. This is why tradition often views these times as periods when the veil is thin. In Bandel's terms, the layers are highly permeable during these transitions.
The phrase duality as a loving embrace appears constantly in his work. He's very clear that these cycles aren't coercive. They don't force you to do anything. But he does say that conscious intensity accelerates progress. What does that actually look like for someone trying to apply this?
It means syncing your personal output with the natural pressure of the cycles. If it's noon and you know the layers are swelling with potential, you don't just passively sit there. You lean into your work with conscious intensity. You're essentially adding your own internal pressure to the cosmic pressure. When the rupture happens at midnight, you have more charge to release into the astral flow. Bandel suggests that if you do this consistently, you turn an ordinary 24-hour day into a microcycle of spiritual evolution. You aren't fighting the tide, you're surfing it.
There's a specific instruction about midnight shadow work and sunrise integration. It sounds like he's proposing a very rigorous schedule. If you miss the window, say you sleep through the midnight discharge, does the whole system break down?
Not at all. Remember, it's a rhythmic invitation, not coercion. Free will shapes the timing. However, the system suggests that if you're out of sync, you'll feel it. You might wake up feeling groggy or unintegrated because you didn't consciously participate in the discharge. The goal is wholeness. Like the oak tree, you're looking for a balance between sun absorption and root growth. If you only focus on the swell, the work and the buildup, but never the rupture and release, you end up with a high-pressure system that can feel like anxiety or stagnation.
I find the comparison to elemental layers particularly fascinating because it implies a scientific structure to what's usually called vibes. By mapping it to the 118 elements, Bandel is essentially saying that the laws of chemistry and the laws of consciousness are one and the same. It's a general unified field theory, as he calls it.
It's a bold attempt to bridge the gap. In mainstream physics, we struggle to reconcile the quantum world with the macroscopic world. Bandel is suggesting that the bridge is awareness itself, moving through these layers. By using Oganesson as the equator, he's pointing to the most complex, heaviest matter we've ever identified and saying, this is where the dream becomes the desk. It's a mechanical approach to mysticism. It says that if you understand the plumbing of the universe, the swell, the compression, the rupture, you can navigate your life with far more precision.
It also highlights the importance of the South Hemisphere, those magical planes of form-giving. In many spiritual traditions, the material is seen as a trap or something to escape. But here, the structure-oriented planes are half of the equation. Without them, there's no manifestation.
That's why he uses the amber analogy. Amber preserves things. It gives them a lasting form. The spiritual chaos planes are necessary for the spark, but the magical amber planes are what allow that spark to actually become a life event, a relationship, or a physical object. The oak matrix doesn't favor the spirit over the matter. It celebrates the loving embrace between the two at the Oganesson equator. It's a very grounded form of Gnosticism, what he sometimes calls organic Gnosticism.
So, the takeaway for the listener isn't just to learn a new set of terms, but to start observing these pulses in their own body. Does your energy swell at noon? Do you feel a release at night? It's about becoming a conscious participant in a heartbeat that's already happening.
Exactly. You aren't creating the cycle, you're just learning to pulse with it. Whether it's the daily rotation, the moon's phases, or the turning of the seasons, the oak matrix provides a map of the pressure and release. Once you recognize the pattern, you stop fighting the natural ruptures in your life and start seeing them as the generative leaps they are. It turns the tension of living into the fuel for manifestation.
The stability of our own progress seems to depend on how well we can navigate these 118 layers of potential and form. By viewing time as a heartbeat rather than a deadline, we open ourselves up to a much more integrated way of being. If this perspective on the cosmic rhythm resonates with you, pass it along to someone who might need a new way to look at their day.